The Ethics of Confucius, Virtue Ethics in the East. Confucius, who lives from 551 to 479 BC, is probably the most recognized name in Eastern philosophy. He's something of a cultural icon, even if it's for no other reason than we've seen fortune cookies that says Confucius say. Everybody seems to know the name of Confucius. But Confucius was actually born as Chung Ni Kung to a very poor family in Shantung. And the great sage of China is an individual who had no formal education whatsoever. His father died when he was very young, and he found himself going out into the fields to work, and so his learning was all done sort of on the streets, so to speak. But yet, he recognized a lot of the problems that were facing the world. The time period that Confucius lived in, or Chung Ni, I should say precisely here, the time period that he lived in was called the Warring States period, and it was a time of constant battles, warfare, violence, where these various tribal groups were trying to vie for more and more power and land and position. And so a lot of philosophers were talking about how do we solve these problems? How do we establish an element of peace? Well, Confucius learns by listening, and he absorbs everything around him. And he starts developing his own thoughts, his own ideas, which he then begins to share with people. And much like Socrates in Athens, he's someone who's simply going to make his reputation by speaking to people on the streets, engaging them in conversation. But he picks up a following, and these people begin referring to him as Master Kung, or Kung Futsu, which many, many years later is Latinized into Confucius. And so the name that we know him by is more of a title than it is an actual name. But Confucius becomes the great figure of Chinese ethics. Confucianism is an ethical system. Some people try to claim that it's a religion. It is not. It is an ethical system because it is geared towards human action. It's geared towards our behavior towards each other within this material sphere, and that's ethics. Now, Confucianism, though it bears his name, Confucius can't really be said to have invented Confucianism. He merely takes what's already there and codifies it. He transforms it into a more coherent, more usable system. There are 4 great books in Confucianism. There's the Book of Great Learning, the Doctrine of the Mean, the Analects, and the Mencius. The Book of Great Learning and the Doctrine of the Mean predate Confucius, and the Mencius comes after him. So the only one that's actually attributed to him would be the Analects, the collected sayings of Confucius. Eastern philosophy is going to be taught differently than the way we do things in the West. Here we have a tendency to have somebody say, okay, read this, here's what it means. But in the Eastern world, you're going to hear stories, analogies, and it's up to you to interpret them. And they're going to speak to you at different times of your life in different ways. And that keeps the tradition very much alive. You can learn at any stage, at any step of it. The ideas of Confucianism become ingrained within Chinese society. So much so that even though communism has been the order of the day in China since 1949, the average person on the street still follows the Confucian principles. Even though Mao Zedong in his Cultural Revolution of the 1960s tried to ban Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, all these ancient traditions, it didn't matter. The people still clung to these because it was their culture. It was their belief. It was so well ingrained. Well, let's take a look at the ideals of Confucianism. First of all, in the Great Learning, we're told that as individuals we should cultivate the virtues within ourselves, we should practice the virtues openly. And it takes one individual who is willing to do this to change the entire world. If I decide as one person that I am going to cultivate these virtues within myself and practice them towards others, then I become a role model that other people can follow. And those individuals can then go on to influence other people, and so on and so forth, until we have cultivated the entire world in the way of good virtue. The four basic virtues or virtue groupings are benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom. Benevolence is that idea of compassion, of kindness, generosity. The idea of the golden rule is found there again. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Righteousness implies that we have an obligation, a duty, to always do what is morally right and proper. Propriety means that there are certain social rules and customs that have to be met. So we have an obligation or a duty to always do what is socially right. And finally, there is wisdom. And I want you to notice that Confucius very specifically uses the term wisdom, not knowledge. And while we'll talk later about Aristotle and the similarities between Aristotle and Confucius, this is one difference, because Aristotle uses the term knowledge, Confucius uses the term wisdom. Why is that important? Well, knowledge is something that anybody can acquire by listening to a lecture, reading a book, but wisdom also implies the life experience of knowing how to use that information. I can go to a library and get a book on brain surgery and read it from cover to cover, and I have knowledge of brain surgery. But that doesn't mean that anybody should expect that I'm going to perform it on them, and certainly nobody should allow me to, because I don't have the life experience of knowing how to use that knowledge. Wisdom comes with time. He goes on to talk about the concept of rectification of the mind. Rectification of the mind basically means putting the mind in harmony with nature, finding a sense of equilibrium, a balance. You know, if you're expected, for example, to practice benevolence, kindness, generosity, compassion, a true sense of justice, how could you do that if you have these extreme feelings of hatred or these extreme feelings of love that are clouding your judgment and pulling you one direction or another? You can't do that. You've got to have that equal balance. The symbol that you see on the screen there is the Chinese symbol for heart-mind. And I always thought it was so neat that in the Chinese language there was such a symbol, because in the Western world we always see the heart and the mind as competing with each other. The heart is emotional, the mind is rational, and so we say stuff like, oh well, the heart went out over the head, which means I let the emotions get the better of me. And of course in Chinese you can talk that way too, but the very fact that this symbol exists implies the idea that the heart and the mind shouldn't be at odds with each other. They should be one and the same. There should be an equilibrium, a balance between them, so that the heart and the mind are always working together and not opposed to each other. In the Doctrine of the Mean, Confucius says, or it's written, the way, or the Tao, is not far from man. When a man pursues the way and yet remains away from man, his course cannot be considered the way. The Book of Odes says, in hewing an axe handle, the pattern is not far off. If we take an axe handle to hew another axe handle and look askance from the one to the other, we may still think the pattern is far away. Therefore, the superior man governs men as men in accordance with human nature. And as soon as they change what is wrong, he stops. Conscientiousness and altruism are not far from the way. What you do not want others to do to you, do not do to them. Now there's an awful lot in that passage, and the thing that stands out to most people right off the bat is the last line, the Confucian formulation of the Golden Rule. What you don't want others to do to you, do not do to them. Again, this is the heart of every ethical system. But there's a lot of other important features in there as well, and one of these is the concept of the Tao. The Tao is the pathway that we make through life. And yes, this is a rather bizarre looking drawing that I've made up here, but it's going to illustrate our basic point. The Tao is an ever-winding and changing path, and there are choices that have to be made at any given moment around it. We start off right about here, and we come up to this point, and now there's a choice. Do we go this direction, that direction? There's 4 different options there, 4 different offshoots. Western society, which tends to be very monolithic, would say, well, there's one and only one way. So if I go one way and you go another way, one of us was right and the other was wrong. But the Eastern tradition says no. As long as the choice is made with the rectified mind and in accordance with the basic virtues, then our action is still part of the Tao. It's still part of this path. And so we could make our way along different paths, but still aim towards and achieve that ultimate goal, which is to attain sagehood. Now, at any given stage, there are choices to be made, and throughout our life, we're constantly making choices which lead to other choices, and so on. But think of it sort of like a roadway. Let's say that here you are in Youngstown, and you want to make your way to sagehood. Well, that's Pittsburgh. There's a lot of different routes that you could take to get from Youngstown to Pittsburgh. Some are going to take longer time, some are going to take a shorter time, some are quicker, some are easier. But if you stay on the road, they're all going to get you where you want to be. And that's the way that life's path is. As long as those choices are made with a rectified mind and in accordance with the virtues, you are in good shape. Does that mean you can't deviate? Well, no. I mean, of course not. We can deviate from the Tao if we make bad choices. If we allow emotion to cloud our judgment, if we're pulled by extreme feelings, if we act contrary to the virtues, we can deviate from the path here. This little point right here, we could end up sort of being led astray. I mean, if you leave from Youngstown heading to Pittsburgh and you end up in Indianapolis, you've taken a serious wrong turn somewhere. Now, you don't have to stay in Indianapolis forever. You can turn around and come back. You can make your way back to the path. As long as you're alive, you can make those choices and make your way back. But the longer you stay off the path, the harder it's going to be to make your way back. So it's better to get on the path, to stay on the path, to keep yourself there. So that's the idea of the Tao. The Tao is just that life path, and let's get on it and let's stay on it. 2 other important terms that are introduced to us in this passage are conscientiousness and altruism. And I've given you the Chinese writing for that. Off to this side, we have this symbol which implies center. And as we've already seen, this symbol implies heart-mind. So conscientiousness, or chung, is center, heart-mind. The idea is that we should always be introspecting. We should always be looking inside of ourselves to the center of our heart-mind, asking ourselves, are we following the basic tenets of morality? Are we making the right choice? Are we staying on the Tao? The only guide we have is our own conscience. And so it's up to us to keep looking inside, to keep introspecting, to seek the center of the self. That's what's going to keep us on the path. The other term is altruism, which is shu. Again, you see the symbol for the heart-mind, but you also see this symbol, which means alike. So altruism literally would be to make others alike in heart and mind to yourself. This is different from the Western sense. For us, altruism simply means helping other people. But to the Chinese, the Confucian, altruism means helping others by first helping yourself. And that's what that passage about hewing the axe handle implies. You know, if you are a carpenter and somebody comes and says, make an axe handle for me, but you've never seen one, you don't know what it looks like, you have no idea how to sculpt it. But if somebody says, look, here's an axe handle, make me another one just like it, now you know what it looks like and you can model it. So, in terms of becoming that virtuous person, in terms of becoming a sage, this is what we have to do, is to have somebody who possesses those virtues, somebody who is that role model. And if we can become that role model, we can help others just as we look to others to be our role model. But the best way to help another person is by first helping yourself, showing that you are capable of doing it, and then you're able to guide others along that path. The ultimate goal, of course, is to attain sagehood. To be a sage is to be the wisest, most revered, most respected member of society. Somebody that when they speak, everyone is simply going to shut up and listen because they intimately care about what it is that you have to say. In the Analects, Confucius gives what amounts to about a 4-line autobiography, which is his road to sagehood. He says, at 15, my mind was set on learning. At 30, my character had been formed. At 40, I had no more perplexities. At 50, I knew the mandate of heaven. At 60, I was at ease with whatever I heard. And at 70, I could follow my heart's desire without transgressing moral principles. Now, a lot of other people considered him a sage much earlier than this, but he didn't consider that he made it to that point until the age of 70. And for him, being a sage meant that he could follow his heart's desire without transgressing moral principles, that he could do anything and everything that he desired without having to worry about whether it deviated from the path, without worrying about whether it was right. The reason for this would be because he spent his life for so long living according to those rules that there isn't anything that he would want to do that would cause him to deviate from that path. He doesn't have to introspect and think, am I doing right? Because he's become synonymous with the Tao. He is one and the same with the Tao because he's got on that path early. He's lived his life with the rectified mind. He's lived his life in accordance with those virtues. And so now he and the Tao are one and the same. He can do anything that he wants, and it's not going to violate the moral principles. At Analects 7.6, Confucius gave us a very nice summary of Confucian principles, basically everything that we've been talking about. He says, set your will on the way, have a firm grasp on virtue, rely on humanity, and find recreation in the arts. Basically, set your will on the way. Decide as early as you possibly can that this is what you want to do. You want to get on that path and you want to follow it. Have a firm grasp on virtue. Once you grab hold of that Tao, don't let go of it. Don't deviate. Because while you can make your way back, it's not easy to do so. Rely on humanity. Realize that other people are on this journey as well, and other people have completed it. So look for that role model and allow them to guide you and help you so that you can be a role model for others when you have completed your task. And find recreation within the arts. If we recognize that as a human being we need certain diversions within our life, but make sure that the things that you do are beneficial to you. Go to a sporting event, go to a museum, go to a concert, go to the theater. These are things that will enrich you while at the same time entertaining you. Find your recreation in ways that are beneficial. And that is the heart of Confucianism.